a small scale, and then just working that employment area as well would just take on someone to start working, helping, providing some of that whānau water support. Api, do you want to talk about the Hastings District Council, the kōrero with the papawainga? Oh yeah, I can touch on it.
You can do that, yeah.
Yeah, so we're met with, obviously, with the Hastings District Council. We're looking at the housing shortage and how we can accommodate, because we know and we attended the iwi chairs hui in Ahuriri a month or 6 weeks ago in regards to the housing crisis, and we're just working or discussing with Hastings District Council how we can accommodate our whānau, because we know there's a huge percentage of our whānau in that housing market that's staying in hotels, and we know it's not great. So we're just looking at a joint partnership and how we can work together to put up whare and develop papakainga. We know why Hiki's leading some of that, so kei te pai, but then how can our other communities lead some of that mahi, and I think government's got a housing symposium here in another 3 or 4 weeks, and some of those initiatives going to be presented back to government in relation to solutions to the current housing crisis in the Hawke's Bay region. So that was a good kōrero. We had a number of Maori landowners that turned up. They've put their whenua up for housing development in the Hawke's Bay area and Ahuriri. I know Hira Taina's doing some mahi, some awesome mahi over there. So yeah, if we can help solve our housing or put up solutions to housing solution, led by Māori, I think that's a good thing in partnership with Hastings District Council. That would be great. Obviously, the regional council want to come on board with that. We're supportive of working as a collective. So I think that's going to be presented in the next government hui that's in 4 weeks' time. That possibly you may be attending. I included a clip, and you can look at your own time, but the Tai Whenua has helped sponsor, along with other organisations, we do an annual kutai dive for our whānau. So under customary practice, we go out on te pānia, and I suppose I reflected on that because obviously we look at water quality, we look at the port, and we look at the dredging and all the mahi that's going on there, and then how does that affect Māori, and then we look at that pānia as a pataka kai. It feeds our whānau, and it always has, so you go through historically, you can look at that as a resource. So on the video, so I must have clicked on, so you can see, yeah, we took one of those cams out and we videoed the whānau diving out there, and then we took some photos of all the whānau that come down and got some kutai, and that's the annual event that happens, and obviously we issue a customary permit for our whānau to go out. But I must say there was actually me, because we had some issues or something, and I said, oh geez, we might need to get the silt tested, because we come up with some abrasions around our face, with the face mask on, because it blocks your skin. And we talked about water monitoring, because we were all diving in there, but we were in a depression, and then we had some lesions that come up just after that dive, and we thought, well, yeah, around the monitoring there, how effective is the monitoring? I know one of our divers, Shade, is from Kahununa, and he's on our committee, but I think it was mentioned to one of the ministers around depositing the soil and what contaminants are on pānia. So I don't know where the minister's going with it, but I know it's in a conversation, so it's good to make you aware, because that was just one of the issues that come up when we were diving on the reef. But watch through the video, it's good. If whānau loved it, they all got some mussels for Christmas. I think they all batted those up, so that was great. Obviously, just Hawke's Māori tourism, we're obviously building a relationship with Tai Whenua and with the marae, so that's working well. Māori Wards is going to be touched on, so I won't go into there. And just around the Mo'haka plan changes and that, and we talked, when we look at the boundary set up 30 years ago, obviously Te Whanganui-Orotu goes right up to the top of the Mo'haka and then cuts across to the Tihoi, comes down, skirts down below Pahueta's boundary down to the lower end, and then comes across to Waikari. So we just wanted to advise that obviously with Te Whanganui-Orotu boundaries, and I can send that in because it's from the chief surveyor that surveyed at that time where our boundary sits. And just in relation to we're aware of the Mo'haka plan change coming up, and I think Mike touched on it earlier in general about that whole water conservation. We know there's a hearing going on today and around the Water Conservation Act, and where does our committee sit in relation to that corridor? And that's why we say I think we need to be fully informed, and as a committee we need to be efficient and effective around engagement, and then how we manage it within our own rohi or within the region. So I think that's a bigger conversation, how we can work collectively with the regional council, James, and I know there's a lot of mahi being done in that space, but we need to be effective when we report back to our taiwhenua, hey, what do we do on these boards as well? So yeah, that was just a quick mention on that. And our CEO from the taiwhenua texted me and she said, hey, there was a big spill and she wants a report from the council just looking at that spillage and obviously the discharge into Whanganui-a-Rotu.
Bring it in your minor item.
Oh yes, in the minor items, but yeah, I'll just put that on tape because she's emailed me twice. So don't forget to raise that corridor next meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. Any from Whanganui-a-Rotu?
Yeah, Madam Chair, can I just add to the report? Concerning our engagement with the Hastings District Council over building more homes on our Maori land and around our marae, I think it's going to be important for us to also engage with the Regional Council. I had mentioned to Rex last week about resource consent for water, and of course once the ball goes in for a papakainga around our lands, our allocation is 20 cubic metres, which is 20,000 litres per day. That each home is allocated 2.1 cubic metres. So what it means is one bore can service up to 9 homes. So with the cost of a well going in close to 40 grand, it would be good in the future, instead of having a bore at everyone's papakainga around your marae, why don't we just have 1 or 2 big bores with enough resource consent to service the whole village, if you know what I mean. Could that work? Would that work? So we need to have you guys on board too. So kia ora.
Chair, can I just respond to that? So one thing to note is that under the tank plan change, that 20 cubes per day is going to drop to 5, which came out of concern that there was over-extraction happening from domestic supply cumulatively. So the allocation is going to go even lower if that provision survives the tank plan change process. What I would have expected, though, is that would be based on a per dwelling basis, and our consents manager Malcolm Miller's at the back of the room, so he can clarify for me. Is the current permitted activity, is that per bore, or if you are supplying multiple dwellings, would it apply to each dwelling? Per property, right.
So it doesn't meet papakainga, because obviously we've got multiple land.
That's right.
Yeah.
So look, what I'm wondering is whether the tank plan change gives us an opportunity to look at the definition of that, particularly in relation to papakainga, and whether we could come up with a provision that's more based on either households or the number of people being supplied, given the priority for domestic drinking water under the national policy statement. So we would want to make sure that we've got a permissive regime for that priority, but it needs to work in practice. So I think we could take that away as an action item and explore it as something that we might be able to resolve through the tank plan.
Needs to happen, yeah.
That without being an actual water provider.
Oh, yeah.
To make it work, I think you'll have to have a per dwelling in the end.
Because we're looking at, as an example, we're looking at 18 homes in one property out at Motiel.
Yes.
So we've got enough for 18 whares, but it's all on the one title. So and then that may be put up to government. So if it does get put up, then if we need to have that engagement to support the council, maybe that's a good time when we've got the minister sitting in front of us to say, hey, you know, to the, I don't know, does government need to look at that if it's not going to work?
Oh, I just think that thinking this sort of thing through, if it isn't per dwelling, it isn't going to work. In actual fact, what you'd be doing is putting rural people onto a metered system before town people.
Yeah, well, effectively they are, so, yeah.
But just,
I mean,
those are.
20 cubes is a lot of water. It's, it's 20,000 litres, and most people consume sort of 600 to 700 litres per day. So 20,000 has historically been quite a big allocation, and probably too high for a single dwelling. But I take the point that on Papakainga we've got a different set of arrangements that need to be provided for. So we'll take that away as an action, and if we can solve it through tank, that'd be great.
Thank you. I just got to be intercept there. I'm supposed to be at the end of minor items by 10:45, and we've got 2 minutes. If you don't mind, do you have anything, Rose? I just want to do on to Tamatea. Kia ora. Can move on to Tamatea.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I'll take the report as read. January has been a full-on month for us, so we've been operating since the first week of January to get all these activities running. So we're going full steam to get them running, and we still have a ways to go before we can get everything consolidated. And what the end result of that is that because we've got so much activity, we now have to transition into a very formal way of operating. For the last 30 years, as Tamatea, we've operated on a very informal way. We're all related, we all got closely connected marae, and we've been able to do it through phone calls and work in that way. We no longer can do that. So we're going to have to move on to a far more formal way of doing things, and that's where we're transitioning right at the moment, which means we're going to have delegates to turn up at different hui and different things, including what you've just been talking about this morning. So that's where we are. I just wanted to then take this opportunity to add to the conversation that you started with Mike and Peter about wānanga and that we're totally supportive of that. However, I think how it's done needs to be discussed. The last thing we need is a grand wānanga that's going to cover everything in one day, and it's advertised all over the country, and we spend half an hour on pōwhiri and 2 hours having a feed, and then just an hour or so talking about the take. So I think we need to burrow down into how that's presented, and also say that I think to be effective, the information needs to be in a form which people can digest it. And also I think that there's strong merit in looking at the large issues and then boring down into tai whenua specific issues as well. And they're not one wānanga, they're possibly different ones, because as we start talking about our own rivers, own lakes, etc., we've got very detailed stuff we want to talk about, which is not the business of a wide wānanga, because it's just too much detail. Anyway, so put that, and also that, just to finish off, because we have an issue with consents, but I'll put it in minor items. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Did you have anything, Dave, Carter? If I can have someone to move that the Māori Committee receives a notes take report, takiwa tai whenua report. Peter, moved by Peter, second by Mike. All in favour? Say aye.
No.
Yeah. Carried. Okay, follow up.
Madam Chair, can I just raise something? Inside many of the reports that we're receiving, there are questions that are left hanging. And I guess my question might be, how do you want to deal with the questions that are sitting inside each of these reports? Yeah, I note in the Heretonga Tai Whenua report that there are a number of issues, one around the land consents, another one around the water quality, which we're going to deal with after lunch, but they're left hanging.
There's quite a few that had actions attached to them through James, but yeah.
I guess I mentioned that because in reading through the reports in advance of this hui, that we did have some people from within the building who were prepared to respond to those questions if we had sufficient time.
Yeah.
So I'm just looking for a process really, so that they're not just left lingering or hanging.
Yeah.
And I agree, and one of the issues here is there's so much on that agenda and not much time, and when it comes to this hui, I think the most important item on the agenda are our reports, our takiwā reports. And, you know, got a big long agenda I've got to rush through, and aroha mai pushing you through. But yeah, we need to, we come and bring these issues to the table, and that's like where it's going to go from here. If it's got an action attached to it, there's a follow-up. But if there isn't, like your request,
Yeah, so Madam Chair, I just want to also support that too as well, because we do have staff here, and if this has been raised, I think, and in my expectation, and my apology for being late, that it did convey some clear questions, which I kind of hope that the staff could respond back to, because they're quite heavy, kind of, you know, really important issues. And I think they do kind of need to be in a conversation so that we know exactly where we are with each other as these things start to impact. And I think they've got, certainly in my mind, just looking at one or two of these, certainly that whole precautionary kind of approach, given that we sort of border on, particularly when we talk about DIN levels. Sorry, there's a typo sin, but could be there too. But thanks for noting that, and I think that maybe there should be an expectation, maybe offline, that we can have a more in-depth conversation. It's a little bit like the notifications when they come up. You know, I'll make contact either Annalie or to who's the one that puts those out, and quite simply I just request who's the officer, is there an AEE, and then, you know, even that needs to be absorbed. So these are the kind of, you know, real sensitive but important issues that does come with a bit of complexity and a bit of read time. So I imagine that even in this exchange with staff around, that maybe an offline conversation would also help too as well. And I would probably take that on board right now, given that I wasn't here earlier on, to catch up with a few of the staff.
that would be a way forward. Offline.
So just through the chair, for those staff who we have alerted to different questions or queries that have risen in the papers, an apology to them, because they've otherwise got work that's waiting for them.
Yeah.
I think Dean probably still needs to stay here in terms of the integrated environment catchment. And we've got, after lunch, we've got Anna coming in, Katrina offline.
And you're right in that, because I know I added some questions in there, and obviously part of the work that the regional council is doing around jobs for nature, because obviously with our Tai Whenua and other Māori organised, we're all putting in proposals, and then how does that impact, obviously, because there's only a small pot of puti available, and then, you know, doubling up on jobs. So I suppose with jobs for nature, and that's happening right now, then how's the effective spend done on the environment, and is there room to work collectively rather than, because we're all putting in our own projects, and I don't think there's no, well, it appears limited cohesion with the projects that have been submitted by Tai Whenua.
Probably another cope-up, but that was entirely the ethos of the alliance, regional alliance.
It may not be happening.
Something we can do between you and us and the staff. Okay, good point.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay. So we're at follow-ups. Item 6. Or that?
Sorry, I'm just going to it now.
Questions?
So
It's just the one about the terms of reference. I don't know whether there's anything to, although
Number 3.
that was specifically in relation to that issue of failure to identify wahi tapu. Is Kerry here?
no.
No, she's not.
It was you, Peter, wasn't it?
Yeah, no, I brought it up because obviously that was in the charter, and it's been in the charter for most probably over a decade, about Wahi Tapu Engagement Council, and then we've noticed we've got a few prosecutions, and we've got a current one going with Te Hua today, and so that's a Wahi Tapu that's been desecrated, and it just seems, I suppose, no use having policy or something in the charter and it doesn't appear that it's been managed because of it's been going on for a number of years. So if it's in the charter, we need to act on it and make sure that there's a process in place to follow through. Because obviously we're having the discussions now with Napier City Council, because that's their area that they manage, and we're holding them accountable, like you do. But we need to make sure, the regional council had maybe a prosecution was going through a process just on the other side, Te Tere, which is out by the Eastview Rugby Club. And then how do we protect those wahitapu sites and then engage more with the council, and we look at some of the work that's currently being done with Napier City Council, and we've got people working through the process, but it should be a collective response, I would think, not just different councils.
So who was following up with it?
So we have a regular dialogue between the 5 councils of the region around planning and regulatory matters, and while we like to think the regional council has robust systems and processes, particularly in terms of our pātaka database, to ensure that our consenting teams identify any wahitapu site that could be impacted by consent. I guess the question in this case is whether the district councils have the same level of focus on that issue. So what we were intending to do is to take that up with our colleagues of the other councils through that regular dialogue. In Kerry's absence, I'm not sure, and I suspect probably since the last meeting, given the Christmas period, we probably haven't. So we'll follow that up, and Katrina's here, so she'll take note of that, and we'll just make sure that we take it up with our colleagues. But if there are examples of the system not working, it's good for us to know about them and find out the reasons why.
If I may, Madam Chair, I'm just for the Hastings District Council, the review on the wahitapu section in the district plan has been sitting there since 2008. And so they've got something like 66 recorded and registered sites. But I guess the real important issue, particularly with the interface of both peri-urban going into some of these places that our tipuna used to occupy I taua wā, there's a lack of, obviously, from our perspective, strong, robust mechanisms to recognise the outstanding natural features, significant cultural sites. And of course that was born out of this whole Craigie Range track, which showed up how we lost sight of the fact that there weren't strong, robust processes, notwithstanding policies in place. So example for Hawke's Bay Regional Council, just to bring you into line, that we have 2 wahitapu that are in the middle of rivers. Ngā Whakatātara is one on the Tukituki, and Ohiti is the other one on the Ngaruroro. So, it's this overlap of jurisdiction, particularly when you have the council, particularly in its monitoring, in its particular role, particularly around rivers, and you've got this river system right next to a wahitapu, that there's this little bit of an overlap. So just want to convey to you right now that, we've been wanting to have this whole proposition, the conversation with the District Council in terms of just stepping up the campaign. Since 2008, we've been waiting almost 12 years so that we can get a very clear sense. There currently is, and let's also acknowledge that COVID has come along in the last 12 months to actually kick back timeframes to address these serious issues. But in the meantime, there are consents that are going through council, and I guess for the part of council, particularly their planners, having some really, really good insight, and this is probably systemic of what's going on within district councils, having particularly a lack of good information that would forewarn an applicant and of course the planner to say, look, we need to take note of this particular site. So it's plain 12-year catch up for us over the Hastings District Council.
Perhaps if I can add to that, and it's good that Te Wairama's at the back of the room, we'll take this into the Te Kupenga discussion to see region-wide as to how each of the Maori partnership teams and each of the 5 councils can actually sort of come together on this right across the region. Kia ora. Just can I add to agenda item 3? Mihi kia koutou o tēnei komiti. So last year you actually came together with the terms of reference that was reviewed, updated, and the other part that was sitting in abeyance was a work program. And the work program needs to work in alignment with the LTP, which we're still working through and which you have been part of. There'll come a point when there's greater clarity about what sits in the LTP in terms of priorities, which should then be picked up as part of the work program for the Maori committee working forwards.
So just, and when we look at that long-term plan, and obviously we're looking at water, and then we just already discussed it, is a major corridor that we need to happen, so that long-term plan needs to reflect, I suppose, what, well, the framework needs to reflect what the Māori committee's saying around it's a huge discussion. I would really need to be engaged with.
So the Māori committee has been part of the LTP process and will continue to be so moving forward.
I'll just also go back to one's the about 1080. The regional council did not currently use 1080 for possum control. Did you use it up on Little Palmery? I booked on that where they had forestry, the ropings and.
Would be
1080?
Osprey, if it was.
Oh, it's
yeah.
under the Osprey area.
Must
Still
be,
under the
yeah.
Osprey area because of okay.
It's all Osprey now.
Oh, okay. Okay, no, I just wanted to query there.
And I did just just to touch on that, because I see Mr Baker's name, and yeah, he believes the case may be appealing, so yep, so maybe
That's
appeal
what I
going
say.
through the process, yep.
Yeah, and it's probably another, but I had that comment about how that affects mahinga kai with them being inlanders. That's one of their main sources of kai, is the wild pork and the deer, just like when you get coastal, the Paumoana. So it's really going to affect those people, because I went to Tongoil for a hui, and that's what we were served, watercress and wild pork. So if that's taken away, what do they serve? How do they manaki their money? So is this a comment there? So 2, that's coming up later on in the meeting, and 4, Katarina's not here, and so I can't give you an answer on that one. So that's the end of the follow-ups. We're going to someone to move the follow-ups. RP, Rob, moved by RP. Second up, please. All in favour, say aye.
Aye.
Yeah. Carried. Okay, next one is. So we go to chair and CEO. Go first, Rick.
Yeah, I will go first, then hand over to James for any technical things. I'll try and be as fast as I can, Michelle, otherwise I'll get...
2 minutes, Rick, 2 minutes.
Firstly, James, Rick, Petty and Charlie and I attended a hui in Wairoa, a strategic hui with, on our tripartite commitments, which was varying success. We had a mediator, and there was some, and whether we got to the core of the issues, I'm not sure. But it was a really good start to getting together, and it was all about us, building the relationships. Following that, Petty, James, and I went to Mahia on the predator free. We met a whole group of farmers and tangata whenua. And just on predator free Mahia, we've spent a lot of effort trying to pull the community together behind this project, but I have to say we are failing. For a small community, I just cannot believe how much animosity exists there, but it does. We've been very firm in saying that we won't do anything without the mandated treaty group, but there is a lot of animosity between the various parties, and I'm not sure we're going to be successful bringing it all together, which is a big tragedy. But I've said to James, we're just not going to give up. We're going to keep going, and Petty's doing the best he can, and I say that all parties want predator-free Mahia. They just got to get in the same room and say they can do it together. So that was not actually a great story. I have had a couple of meetings with on the Wairoa Hort program with the new chair they appointed, Tom Keefe, who's also chair of commercial division of Parawera, so it's really good bringing those two parties together. I have to say that it's really successful. I think the team in Wairoa doing a fantastic job bringing that horticulture program together, and it is an example of everyone working together. So that's a really good news story, and I think it will have a big results in Wairoa. I attended the Waitangi Day, which I saw many of you there at Clive and Regional Sports Park. I have to say that our Waitangi Day has finally, and Hiratonga has finally come together, and it was a big success at Clive, and I thought the Regional Sports Park continued to be a huge success. Just to, I don't know how many people, but you'd have to say perhaps between 5,000 and 10,000 people. Lots of kids, free rides. It's just a really wonderful day. And all of those of you there would have seen that.
Okay.
Before that, prior to that, James and I met Minister Mahuta. We talked. She talked about a raft of issues. I was incredibly impressed with her grip of the topics. She talked about 3 waters. Of course, that's her responsibility. We were very emphatic with her that we could agree with 3 waters as a region, but we wanted to keep control in our region. She was very sympathetic to that we did not want our 3 waters to be controlled out of Palmerston North or Wellington.
Sure.
And she was very sympathetic. So we now have to, Nahiwi was at the meeting as well. So we now have to get together and put a proposition to her on how we keep the 3 waters program within our ruhi. And I think we're up against it, because I do think there's a whole bunch of bureaucrats in Wellington who want to do it differently. We need to fight for our rights on this issue, and we all need to be together on that, because this is huge for us. She also talked about Maori wards, of course, and new legislation she's putting on the table. And I guess the big topic of the day was housing and the homelessness, which we're all incredibly concerned with. And it's very distressing to see so many people in motels, and actually people in our parks. And 70% of the challenge we have there, 70% of the people who are homeless are Maori. So, you know, we got to deal with this issue, and it's just a dreadful state of affairs that somehow we've got ourselves into. So that was really good. I just want to talk about one thing. I went for a walk through the Uraweras, and there was a lot of possums in the Urawera, and you know, you had to struggle to hear the bird noise. And one of my kids said to me, you know, well, what, Dad, I can't hear the bird noise in our own place at home. So we went home, and since Christmas, we have killed now 16 possums, 6 ferrets, 2 wild cats, and numerous rats. And I thought maybe we had a couple of possums, but we've killed 16. And the ferrets, well, speaks for itself. And you can already see the birds coming back. So we don't kill those pests, we're not going to have any birds left. And I think it was out of control on my. And I'm talking about 10 acres, by the way. That's what I'm killing. So the challenges we have in the Uraweras, the challenges that we have in our right through our ruhi and Hawke's Bay is huge. So that's all I have to.
So, Chair, I do have a presentation. I'll go through it as quickly as I can. So probably the first thing to say is that we're hoping that this year is going to be very different from last year. It was a fairly tough year, as you know, with COVID and with the drought. Our CEDM team is still on high alert in terms of community transmission, and we remain vigilant around that, although we expect that our role around community welfare will be somewhat diminished if there is a community outbreak, because central government's got better organised. But we all obviously keep a close eye on that. The regional economy's in much better shape than we thought we were going to be in this time last year. Having said that, we still have our job creation projects, which we were funded from central government, well underway, and so The work on the Wairoa Riverbank, the Upper Tukituki scheme and Hiritonga, that's all well advanced. And we're working with the providers around employment, and they've got KPIs around Māori employment as well. And that's true of the erosion and riparian fencing, so that's well rolling out now. And as Rick said, we're still working on the Whakatupu Mahia project, which was given funding as part of Jobs for Nature. Regional Alliance has been touched on, that remains a work in progress. And our regional recovery managers continuing to work with Tash Romano on behalf of Te Kahui Ohanga o Tukitimu and Matariki. We're continuing to work on that being an effective vehicle for regional development. So that's sort of on the economic side of things. On the core council side of things, so we're in year 3 of our long-term plan now, and as an organisation, I kind of feel like we're really hitting our straps, and the presentations you'll see this afternoon, possibly before lunch, from Dean and Dean over there will give you a real sense of the progress we're really starting to make, particularly in some of those hot spots. So progress at Whakaki and Tūtira and Ahuriri, Upper Catchment. Things are really moving well there now with landowners, and we've got loads of work happening on the ground. So that LTP was all about growing our capability as an organisation, so really growing by about 100 staff, about a third, or a 50% increase on what we had historically. There's more tools, resources, funds, partnerships. As you know, we can talk for hours about that. But just a reminder that we've been in this big growth mode, and a big focus on regulation, but also a focus on supporting people through incentives and funding arrangements that are complementary to regulation. We had a bigger focus in the LTP on our engagement support for tangata whenua, part of which is obviously Petty's group and working more actively with our committees and resourcing our committees better. And as we discussed this morning, we've still got a long way to go, and our next long-term plan will continue to work on that, but really happy with the progress we've been making. To some of the frustrations that were alluded to earlier on, I think, you know, when I look at the work that this committee tries to do and the council tries to do overall, probably our biggest constraint is the resource management planning system and how incredibly slow it is. Mare referred to, you know, planning provisions in the Hastings District Plan that have been sitting around for over a decade. Our regional resource management plan is, you know, 14, 15 years old this year. So the time it takes, we've seen Tank, we're now working with Kotahi, it's very slow and very cumbersome. And indeed, 8 minutes ago, the government announced their response to the review of the Resource Management Act. So they have announced formally that the RMA will be scrapped and replaced by 3 new pieces of legislation. And so I'm hopeful that in time we're going to end up with a far more agile system that enables us to put rules in place around resource use and to take action on, the impacts on the environment that we want to avoid faster, quicker, with bigger sanctions and those sort of things. So we still work with that constraint, I guess, is the key point I wanted to make. Just in terms of this year, so you're aware that we're ramping up Kotahi. We've still got a way to go on Tank, so hearings in May. We'd like to think that we'll get a final report and a final plan change on Tank by the end of this year, but that'll be all a question of whether it gets appealed to the Environment Court and gets dragged out. Outstanding water bodies, we're just waiting now on the final report from the commissioners on that, but that's now concluded. It'll be nice to have that tucked away. And water conservation order are still undergoing appeals this very day through the Environment Court. Loads for that team around national engagement, around reform of resource management and national policy on freshwater and a bunch of other things. Science team, we're building that evidence base for Kotahi. Biosecurity, Rex mentioned the issues we've got around possums, so we've got a review underway of our possum control program. And this summer we've continued to battle the Chilean needlegrass, which continues to grow in its extent throughout the region, and that's a real worry. And we're continuing to look at whether there are different ways of dealing with that pest and more resources required. One of the things you'll hear about this afternoon, which is a good problem to have, is we've now really having more interest from community groups and landowners than we can cope with in terms of biodiversity protection, fencing, erosion control. All of our teams are now flat out, and we're having to put people on the back burner because we just can't cope with the volumes of what we're getting through. So we're seeing a real sea change in the attitudes of landowners and catchment groups coming together, and now everybody wants our help to restore and protect. It was a great problem to have, but we've only got so many hours in the day and so much resource. Consents and compliance, so the Tuki land use consents. So a reminder, over 200 farms in the Tuki require consents to farm, and they've got till the end of February to apply for those consents. We're still not seeing the number of consent applications coming through the door we would expect, so this is going to get into hard compliance and enforcement territory pretty damn soon. When I last spoke to you in September, I think it was, or November, we had 15 prosecutions on the go. We're up to 22 now. So we're just continuing to ramp up our effort on that. I have to say I'm enormously frustrated at the pace of the judiciary. There was a significant event that this committee was concerned about in December of 2019 in the Tūtaikuri. We took immediate action. We laid a prosecution. We are still waiting for the judge to sentence in that case, and I believe that's going to happen on the 4th of March. But it does show you that the time it takes to get an outcome through the judicial process is enormously slow. So with the upgrade of the flood schemes this year, the asset management crew are really at their probably at their highest level of activity ever, and the water security program continues to grow. As I mentioned to you before, not only are we doing a long-term plan at the moment, but we're replacing our whole finance system. That's an incredibly big multi-year project, and we're introducing a new contact centre, and we're trying to deal with all these staff that we're continuing to recruit through our accommodation expansions as well. So pretty big year ahead, and I think perhaps just for the long-term plan we're developing at the moment, it's worth noting that the implementation of freshwater reform continues. There's the planning piece, setting the new rules through Kotahi. There's the regulation. We've got a whole bunch of new regulations around farming that need consents, and they need compliance, and there's a big science program around all of that. I mentioned before that we've got all this demand from the community, but we've still got 700 priority sites for biodiversity protection in the region, and we're able to deal with maybe a couple of dozen per annum, and it just gives you a sense of the scale of the challenge we have as an organisation dealing with that issue, because biodiversity in the region is still in decline. Climate crisis, so the focus is on reviewing our flood schemes and getting them up to scratch, and I think the flooding in Napier end of last year is just a reminder of how vulnerable we are. We'll get more of those, they'll get worse, and we need to protect our communities. So that's a big focus of work. Coastal hazards again, climate change, we'll get sea level rise, and we're going to continue to get storm surges. And we're going to have to get much better at using our water more efficiently as a region than we have. So lots of work there. And then on transport, we've got to get people out of cars. People probably saw comments from our Transport Committee Chair on the weekend. We've got far too many people driving alone in vehicles in the region, and we want to get more people cycling, walking and into public transport. So we've got some ideas around that. And then perhaps the final thing I'd say, which is a challenge for this table and for council and for our community, we've introduced in the National Policy Statement this on freshwater this idea of Te Mana o Te Wai, and the priority for our water bodies around the ecological health coming first and foremost. The government's announcement at 11 o'clock today was that the new Resource Management Act, the replacement of the Resource Management Act, will introduce a much stronger treaty partnership commitment and introduce the notion of Te Mana o Te Taio. And again, what that will be requiring is that this council and our community puts the environment in its totality ahead of the economy and ahead of people. Environment will become first. So how we give effect to that will be a local set of issues, and we'll have to work with you on that and go on that journey, but it's going to be a big step change in terms of the way we've typically managed the environment, which has been in the past about balancing the economy and the environment. The longer we're going to be balancing, we're going to be making sure the environment comes first. And if that means that the economy or some of our social needs have to be sacrificed for the environment, then that will be the priority. So that's a big change, and that represents another whole chapter in the, I guess, the evolution of this institution from where it came from. So there's lots of work ahead for us to do this year and beyond.
Thank
Kia ora
you,
tātou.
James, and I suppose that last comment, and that's what we're all about, eh, whānau? The why comes first, over and above economics. So, yeah, no, kia ora. Oh, geez, if you've got any questions, very short.
Very quickly,
Up in there.
through the chair, James, how do we control the rabbits? Is that up to individual landowners?
It is up to individual landowners. So there was a time when the predecessor of this organisation, obviously the Rabbits Boards, had, I think, some like 30 staff operating over 4 depots. So we had a large operation. And of course, the problem with rabbits is if you can't eradicate them, which you can't, you've got to keep up that effort every year, year in, year out, because they'll just keep coming back. And so the council of the day made a decision that it would be landowner responsibility, and that's where we sit today. You know, if the community wanted us to raise rates, and it would be a very expensive job to get back into the business of possum control, then theoretically we could. But that's not the current pest management plan, and so it is over to landowners. And so we support landowners with information. I think we subsidise bait. Certainly no, not bait for rabbits at the moment. Just possums. Just possums.
The district council does the bait.
So there's certainly bait you can buy, but the bait's not hugely effective. You need all the tools and night shooting, all those sorts of things. So look, it's a real problem. But look, the weather has been a big driver. They love it dry, and it's been hot and dry for the last few years. And unless we get some cold, wet weather, they're going to continue to be a problem.
You know, if 50 to 80% of landowners are not doing a thing, so then who responsibility is it?
So look, this is the problem we're concerned about with possum control as well, is that there are landowners that are not doing what is required of them, and that's why in that case we're going to have to think about a different model. But I'm more confident that we can get on top of our possum situation again than I am with rabbits, to tell you the truth.
I just got a quick question around the KPIs for Māori employment, and that'd be good to actually have some data, because that's what I'd like to see, how you're meeting those outcomes. So if you could provide that would be great.
That was a follow-up. Yep.
And just that there was a mention around Te Whanganui o Rotu and Ahuriri estuary. I suppose I have to mention Te Whanganui o Rotu, the taiwhenua hasn't been engaged. So all right to put that in a report, but when we have our name in the report and then there's no engagement within that, and I know we met with Napier City Council years ago with the Mayor Dalton, and he made some promises that he didn't deliver on, and obviously we're going for a big MOU now, Napier City Council, but just, I suppose there needs to be engagement with the taiwhenua in regards to the estuary, because it is an important part of our taonga for our marae. Yep.
Understood. My comments were particularly in relation to the upper catchment, the work we're doing with landowners around fencing and planting, which Dean will probably touch on in his presentation. Yep.
Okay, got it.
Okay, got it. So if I could get someone to move the Register Council Chair and Chief Executive's verbal report. Move it. Move on anyway, seconded by Api. All in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against, carried. Now we're going to number 8. Call for minor items. So I've already got them recorded from our pre-meeting. So I'll just have this subject number 1 is white baiting. That's Api's, it'll come up later in the end of the hui. Number 2 is chemical spillage, Ahuriri estuary. That's Peter Eden. He's also going to speak on the 3rd and 4th item, which are Pakiratahi Awa and economic development. Which is not to do with awa. Number 5 is Karewarewa stream. It's Mike Puck who's going to speak to that, and 6 was Porongaho awa. It's Paura Shasha. Any other?
Winning local elections Wānanga series.
Local elections Wānanga series. Anyway.
Yeah. And then, sorry, a second one is Ngāti Pāro Waiōhiki activity.
Ngāti Pāro, what was it? What was the other thing? Activity. Any others?
Council for you?
Council for you? Oh my goodness. So Rex. Senator.
Yes, a consent workshop in Tamatea.
Workshop. Guys always do this to me. Thank you very much. So that's 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 10 again. I'm going to break the record. Thank you very much. And then we'll go on to information on performance monitoring items. So first up is the Māori representation presentation. Is that you, Dave? Or Kenny?
Oh, we'll do this as a...
Perhaps the tag approach to it. Leanne's on here.
Oh, she is, Leanne's down the back.
Oh. So just acknowledging that Leanne helped authored this paper and also remains on hand in case we need some interpretation or definition through the options that are presented. I'm hoping that everyone's had a chance just to read through the paper and not so much to reflect on what happened last year, but more so to look at the opportunities given the changes that are being made to the bill through Minister Mahuta's actions and program of mahi. So I'm just wondering whether or not we can actually take the paper as read as opposed to working through the options, and whether or not we can just open the floor through the chair to take any questions.
Eddie, it's probably worth just letting the committee know that we are planning to have a workshop with the council next week ahead of the council meeting at the end of the month to discuss the matters, and any sentiments, I guess, that are expressed today would be conveyed to that workshop next week for sure.
Any questions? Comments? Oh, sorry, anyone looking at me.
I just have a part-time. What is the representation review? You know, what's involved, how long it takes? Like, because if you haven't been through any of this before, you have no idea what that's about. So can you put it all?
Which I haven't, so I'll probably defer to both Leanne and to James.
Perhaps if Leanne comes up, that'd be helpful. Leanne's been through a number of these and is our resident expert.
And what tribe is she?
You got the question, Leanne? Good. Thank you.
Tēnā koutou. So a representation review is a review of the constituencies, the number of councillors, and how the region looks as far as the elections will go. So at the moment we have 5 constituencies: Waro, Central Hawke's Bay, Ngāruaroa, Hastings and Napier. And so if the council were to decide to establish Māori constituencies, then we would have to look at that entire arrangement and how the Māori constituency or constituencies would fit into that picture. And it's all based around the population and how those representation per councillor, all of those sorts of things. The actual process itself is probably from the 8th of September, if we take it from the 8th of September to the 15th of January, that's the formal process. So before that is all the investigation and laying out what the options could be.
Is that just conducted by us?
Yes, and there's a period where it's open for submissions for at least a month, so people can submit on whether or not they support what council's proposing, and then there's hearings after that. Council reviews what they proposed initially and can change that in response to submissions if they think somebody else had a better idea that they think fits better, and then there's also a period for appeals. So after the final, people can appeal, and then that goes to the Local Government Commission.
Just looking at the current wards. So they're more based on district rather than population.
No, the in the regional council, the constituency boundaries have to align like within the district council boundaries. They can't, although they can split, they can't really cross over. But the number of councillors is based on the population figures.
Within that.
Yeah, within that, yeah.
Any question? Anyone?
Yeah, I just got a question, because obviously, and we're having this discussion with Napier City Council, because obviously we look at the boundaries for our marae, and our Māori boundaries are in Ahuriri, but then you go with Hastings and we're in Hiratonga. Hey, so I don't know whether that's going to play into the factor when you look at the equation, because it doesn't suit for Māori, the boundaries doesn't suit for where our marae sit, because we all whakapapa back to Te Whanganui-a-Rotu, which is in Ahuriri, but yet we've got to go to Hiratonga. Hey, with the Hastings, it just doesn't match. I don't know if it's part of the equation.
Those will all be, things that we'll have to consider through representation review, what suits best for the most effective representation. I believe it's similar for Maori constituencies as for general constituencies, is that we can't go down to we can't have a constituency for Mariwa within Napier, that sort of thing. It doesn't get that granular, but yeah.
Then what sort of resource are we talking about, and are we prepared to resource the representation review well for general public as well as like huia, iwi, huia, hapu? So my question is, do we have the resource and the time to do that process well?
Yes.
Mike?
And I suppose sorry.
Kia ora, Leanne. Thank you for that. So I think I just want to take this conversation back a bit and actually take it back to the actual decision that's actually required here. So my understanding is that this taki is going to come back onto the table, and it's in regards to whether this vote can actually go in 2022 versus it being pushed out to 2026 and beyond. That's really what we're talking about here, correct?
Correct.
So it's not really about the mechanics. The mechanics side of it will come later. Actually, we need a decision out of councillors. The conversation has not changed. It is still the same conversation. We are still looking to our councillors, to make a determination as to where they stand in support of Māori wards. Because you have not told us. The last time you told us this was back in 2017, when you said no, but at least you said something. You've said nothing up to this point, other than to say, we will put this out to a referendum, which would have been binding up until recent late, with the potential change in the law that's coming through Parliament. But what we actually are asking of you, what is your position? Are you going to make us sit and wait beyond 181 years? How much longer do you require us to wait before you value our voice? Before you stop muffling us at this table? That's the real question here. And that's what we want to hear. It's not about the mechanics. The mechanics will work themselves through. So that's the conversation.
Just through the chair. Sorry.
Oh, no, same corridor.
I guess what we were wanting to do with this paper was to say that this is an item that will be coming up in front of council later on this month, and was not to be preemptive of the decision, but certainly to hear the views from this committee in respect of that paper coming up in front of council on the 24th of February, I understand. So it's a wee bit about understanding what the options are and what the process is, a wee bit about mechanics, but most certainly an opportunity for those around the Māori committee to express their view.
And we did discuss that this morning, and what might we unanimous, and in our kōrero we supported that, and won't waver from their kōrero, and all our tai whenus have discussed it, so we'll all support a Māori ward, so it's a collective approach from all our Māori Standing Committee members. Yep.
I suppose if you look at, you refer to the options, it would be 5.2. Correct?
Madam Chair,
Yeah.
Guppy.
a couple of wards would be fine. Ideally, though, we need a ward in each tai whenua to make it really work. And that would be my
It comes
My
at the,
request.
I think it comes
This is
down
the problem.
to population, doesn't it,
Bound.
Leanne?
Yes. So the number is, unfortunately, it's not discretionary. It's defined in the legislation as a formula which is based on the population that is enrolled on the Maori roll.
On the Māori roll, so does that still equate to two
Yes,
representatives?
yes. So as long as the council is made up of between 9 and 14, which is the most, members, there is the ability to have 2 Māori representatives at the moment. If you drop that down to 8 councillors total or less, then it shifts down to 1.
Okay, so we've got 9 councillors, so that doesn't impact on their numbers, that's 2 on top of it comes
It could be,
to
yes.
11.
And I think there was a kōrero there in Rex in the previous meeting we held at Māori Ward, so several years ago, and then the council made a commitment to look at how do we go around and encourage people to vote, because obviously, and it was old just kōrero, but it was around how to, because a lot of Māori don't vote, and I think we discussed it at the time, and it was around seeing value in the process, and that would be an important part of any work or mahi to get that messaging out there to say how it is important to vote and participate in local elections. So when you do that mahi, or whoever does the mahi, I think it's around messaging out to our Māori community, hey, your vote does count and you can make a change. So I think that would be an important part of the work.
And ahead of the 2019 elections, there was a change in the legislation that actually made the chief executive responsible for encouraging participation in the voting process.
Great, James.
Very fortunate that Leanne did a fabulous job working with the other councils on a big campaign, and I think we got a reasonable turnout, which was good. And obviously, if council did resolve to create Māori constituencies, we'd have an additional module in that work program that would focus on the Māori role electors and ensuring that they're aware of the opportunity and what have you. So we would do dedicated promotion at that time.
Alongside the minor item that Henawai's going to talk about local elections.
Did you have another question, Uppy? No? No?
I thought you had a question up.
Oh, no. Thank you. Mike, did you have something?
one item.
Oh, so I think just to follow on, so just to repeat what Peter said in regards to, so we've discussed this morning, our position as Tai Whenua has not changed. It is still the same. We are still desirable that there is Māori wards. As I said earlier, the mechanics of it is not desirable. It's not really what we would prefer, but we understand these regulations around it. I think it would be a shame if councillors hid behind the mechanics and in order not to make a decision, a public statement as to where they stood. I think that would be a real shame. I talked about at the last vote, council kicking for touch as a safe option. I think to see something similar this time would be actually a deliberate foul. And we don't want to go down that road. We take the reaction that we got from just kicking for safety versus a deliberate foul. I think we'll see a totally different reaction from the Māori community, given the stance that government is making and the statements government is making. They are saying there needs to be Māori wards. They are asking you, councillors, please establish Māori wards. It's not a difficult conversation, to be quite frank. I understand the political ramifications, but part of that is from your own making. So please don't punish us. for your decisions.
May I add to as well that while my chairman, fellow member here, made reference to 180 years of this not being solved, I guess the other implicit part that comes with it, it's been well documented, well researched. From the point of the native land courts in 1850, we didn't get to have a voice till 1970, and it still doesn't play ourselves out today. So that evidence is tucked in within major research programs that have come through the settlements process. It sits there, you read, you weep actually, in terms of what was taking place, particularly around the colonial attitude and behaviour toward Maori. They came in wanting to have active partnership in the decisions, and of course here we are in 2021. So I just want to add that to the 181 years, there is evidence of it, and also just to acknowledge those councillors that were brave enough to actually put themselves forward in that discussion. Madam Chair, I've just got a phone call. My apologies, but my wife went into hospital for surgery, and now I've got to go back over there very shortly. So I'm going to miss out on the discussion this afternoon. But I do pick up with just on one small soundbite that was being mentioned. Was it let it act? What was it? I think it was a little thing in there about acting on the LTP. Well, I think I need to just convey you need to act on this too as well. So that's my little kind of bit at this. I just asked for my...
The resolution you're putting forward.
Well, might I add too, I thought the other thing that I probably didn't sit really well with that particular cliche, if I could just look it up, is that I think we really need to make real progress. And I think there's two different words between acting and progress. So I just want to kind of leave that as part of my thought, and I apologise for leaving early, Madam Chair. I would have wanted to stay to make that contribution, but I'll be making headways back to Hastings to the hospital.
So before you go, can we, because we passed that as a motion, we put a motion forward this morning as a committee. Can we frame up a resolution in relation to supporting Māori boards as a committee?
It is mandated representatives of our tai
Those
whenua
two.
and executive that we support the Māori ward.
If I could just suggest...
Madam Chair, can I enter this discussion, because it's not simply about, we've already done what you've just said, and that's not changed, as Mike said. But what we haven't done is answered this report. So if you look at paragraph 5, there are options, and the major option in there is between 5.2 and 5.3. So, one, the council could resolve not to do anything until 2023-26. And from Tamatea's point of view, we totally oppose that. Any delay in this, so it's not just a matter of whether to agree, but whether to do it now. That's the crucial thing, and it's, as Mike said, it's not about the mechanics of it. It's whether there's going to be any action now, or whether it's going to be delayed till the next round. So I'm just going to put our position on the table. We're opposed to any delay in a decision.
So I suppose that could be, the motion could refer
So
to...
if we have a motion, it's got to incorporate acting now, not just that we want it to happen, but we want it to happen in this round of discussions. Yeah.
Chair, that is actually options 5.1 and 5.2. 5.1 is quite important to send that signal to council.
Yeah.
If you want to happen.
Yep.
So the motion will be to oppose 5.1 and support 5.2?
Repeal both of them.
Those support 5.1.
You've got to do it.
Support 5.1.
Yep.
Oppose 5.2.
Oppose 5.2.
Oh, sorry, oppose 5.3.
Support 1 and 2.
Yes.
1 and 2.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll move that. Yeah.
And moved by Peter Eden, seconded by Mare Apatu. All in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried.
Chair,
Excuse me,
can
Chair,
I...
just a point of order. Just to be clear, did you hear a voice raised in opposition? So I think you could consider declaring it carried unanimously.
Carried unanimously. Thank you.
I was just going to draw your and the committee's attention to also 5.4 as to whether there was a view of this committee in regards to 5.4 and the options list.
I'd like to advocate for 5.4 as well,
Yes.
because I think we do need to engage not so much the rest of the public, but to hapu, because what we have to also consider is we have mana whenua reps here, but there are others on the Maori roll who aren't mana whenua that need to be engaged, because this is how their voting right will change. So there has to be that engagement piece in this as well. And I think that has to be done well and resourced well. So we can make these decisions at this table and get advice and cater pai, let's hear that. But we also have to hear from the willing voters who are on the Māori roll, who aren't mana whenua and aren't represented at this table.
So I agree with part of that, but it's the actual wording itself that doesn't quite match that, because it resolves the initially public engagement to gauge whether public sentiment ahead of reconsidering the establishment of Māori constituencies prior to 21.
Yeah,
You're making this decision
about something else.
at your next regional, your next regional council meeting, which is the 24th of May. If I think, that's it. That's really the guts of this. Yes, we can get out there, but it's not a great deal of time. Is this going to affect how you vote as a councillor at the end of the day?
And sitting here, you have a significant...
Because council didn't get out and didn't do its job.
That's right, and that's part of the problem.
So are you going to blame us for that?
Yeah.
So do we take the blame for that?
No,
Are we punished for that?
We need to take responsibility of that.
How much is on the database of Ngāti Kainganui Iwi Incorporated? I think it's over 30,000 registered members of Ngāti Kainganui Iwi Incorporated, Matapai. I hold the mandate for Wairo. We speak on behalf of tangata whenua. And
database, say over
7,000. How many you got, Peter?
I think it's about 8,000-9,000 registered, and that's growing. And then obviously all our maraes now, we're driving the databases there. We're saying to our whānau, hey, you've got to register, so we can actively be engaged within this process. So you'll find over the next few years that's going to increase, because through COVID, we've identified shortcomings in our database. So, and when we build databases, we're not even building databases for what happens at the marae. We're building our database to be more effective in these processes with the council, central and local government.
Have you been engaging with your hapu whānau?
If I can just add to this, regardless of which way this vote goes on the 24th, I think it's incumbent on council to do so, to go out and actually consult. That should not be a recommendation that we have to make here today. We've made our position known as to where we stand in regards to what we want to see in regards to Māori wars and the direction we'd like to see council move. This is just part of the mechanics. It doesn't need us to support the recommendation. This is on council, regardless of which way this thing goes.
Can I just have it recorded that 5.4 that I do support, along with the other recommendations by this committee, because I strongly feel that we have to do that consultation piece.
But you're talking about mana in the aim. I mean, outside is Ngā Rawa. Yeah, but that's nothing to do with the vote for Māori wars. That's the mechanics afterwards. We're going to have to do that anyway. Let them know what's going to happen.
Yep.
If the decision goes that way.
Madam Chair, this is like the...
Sorry, I'll just have Rick set his hand up and then I'll go to you. Rick.
I just want to deal with this issue of consultation, and it's a very good thing to do in a lot of instances, but I'm not always that committed to it. I want to be clear about this. The opportunity comes up and there's a window, and if there's a time here, then it's incumbent on the leaders to act to take advantage of that opportunity. No question about it. I also note in this regard that there is a critic of this process who is claiming that we have to consult and so on, a well-known critic, who was at this table when this council passed a resolution to ban the fracking and oil exploration. The council was told that we were acting illegally. We had no rights to do that, that we could be challenged to the High Court. But still, that person put up his hand and voted for it. So very happy to not have consultation when they agreed with the decision, but when they don't agree with it, then they want consultation. So I want to say that let's be clear about this. There are issues here which are about justice, about equity, about doing, in my view, simply the right thing, for which there can only be one answer.
I agree to 1 and 2. We need something tangible, as 1 and 2 options are, for our people to come and engage. We can't do it the other way. Can't go and engage and say, hopefully we're going to vote on 1 and 2 and win. We need 1 and 2 to go through first. Then we can put that up to our people, something tangible to talk about. Kia ora.
Yeah, that motion's already been passed unanimously.
Yeah. And we've had the discussion, so from our tai whenua for Te Whangai o Rotu, we've had the kōrero, we've wānanga, so that's it for us. And it's clear.
And really, Māori doesn't want a seat in the regional council with the partnership that was promised to us. In the end, I can't see anybody saying no. Everybody I've asked has said yes. I've even asked Ngāti Pārai whānau, do you want 2 Māori seats on the regional council? Aye. Most definitely. I've asked our whānau at home. I've never come across one that said no. Whether they're taurāhere or mana whenua. Anything else?
I just want to clarify with 5.4. So is that going to happen, it says in here, ahead, isn't it? Is it going to happen afterwards anyway?
So that's a decision, a resolution that needs to be taken by the regional council. This is just indicating the options that would sit in front of the regional council. So if that's the decision that they make, then that's what will happen as a result. So perhaps just to close this one off.
Did you have something to add, James?
Oh, I'm just going to add, because I've just received an email from the Māori Affairs Select Committee. They have just this minute called for submissions on the bill, and the closing date for it is tomorrow.
Tomorrow?
I'm sure they don't want to consult
Calling now.
And I understand from the Minister that they'd love to see people's voices come out, because there will be certain organised groups that will submit. So
I'm sure Michelle can put
encourage
one
you to
on
do so.
behalf of our Māori Standing Committee, eh, Michelle?
Support.
Just a short comment, yeah. Hey, is this
Well, I think your resolution today does enable this committee to make a submission on that basis. There's no problem with it. I'll forward the email to Michelle.
Email, please.
Māori do it.
James. Oh, Māori. We'll put Māori since he left the meeting. And I feel that's fine. Okay, we'll move on to Aroha Mai staff at the time, 10 to 12. Integrated catchment management. Catchment delivery, is that Dean?
Dean
and Evan? And okay, you can introduce yourself now.
Yeah, kia ora, Chair. If I can, just perhaps as part of the introduction, is to provide an apology from the General Manager, Ian Maxwell. He's actually tied up with business down in Wellington today. Otherwise, he would be here to introduce and certainly support this agenda item.
Kia ora everybody. Ko Dean Evans Takaona. My role here at the council is managing the catchment management activities of the council, and specifically the delivery of actions on the ground. On my left we've got Dean Roughton, who's one of our catchment advisors in the Waipawa office, and Lee here is one of our GIS people upstairs who's going to drive our presentation today so we don't stuff it up. So I guess just as a bit of an overview about what you've seen in the paper in front of you, and I'll take that as being read. I guess the erosion control scheme of the council came about because of a bit of modelling the council did a few years back, which identified a whole lot of erosion. So approximately 252,000 hectares across the region is identified of having a high level of erosion. And that was an estimation of around like 3.3 million tonnes of sediment heading into the waterways of this region during the course of a year. So the council established the erosion control scheme in about mid-2018, and it did so to enable planting and other erosion control works to occur on this highly erodible land. And to do that, they created incentives to provide the initiatives for the landowners to engage and get out there and put some erosion control in place. And the key aim of the scheme is to reduce soil erosion, improve water quality, and reduce the amount of sedimentation that's going in the waterways, improve the terrestrial and aquatic biodiversity through habitat protection and creation, and to provide community and cultural benefits through forest ecosystem services. So that's the general theme around it. So I just want to give you a little bit of an overview of how we've been progressing with the program to date. So what you see on the screen in front of you is basically where we started out with the scheme back in 2018-19 financial year. The dots you see on the map as they progress through the years is how the numbers of engagements with landowners have occurred across the region. Yep.
Jesus, look at Paul now.
So I guess where we've got to today is there's you can see this is called a heat map, and you can see how there's a range of hotspots occurring around the region. Effectively what you're seeing there, each one of those dots is an engagement with a landowner who is undertaking works on the ground. So this is the doing part of some of the discussion that's happened in the past. And I guess those are all hopefully positive engagements with this council and achieving good environmental outcomes. This next screen is around to give you some context around some of the fencing works that we're undertaking across the region. And this particular map is showing you that the amount of fencing on the ground is equivalent to roughly Bayview to New Hawke, or if you flip that over and you head south, it's basically Napier to Woodville. So I guess if you're putting that fence up yourself, heading down the road, it's a reasonably decent amount of fencing.
139 kilometres.
You don't need to go any further anyway.
Anyway, so I guess the overall objective is as the comments mentioned earlier in James's report, that there's a lot of engagement happening with landowners at the moment. There's a big movement to engage. People are wanting to get on board. They're wanting to start doing environmental actions. And Dean is about to take you through a case study of some of the work that he's doing in the Waipuka catchment and some good proactive engagement with the landowners in that area.
Thank you, Dean. Kia ora. This is I'm going to be talking about the Waipuka catchment. So this is in behind Ocean Beach, and the Waipuka streamway flows out to Ocean Beach, out to the lagoon there. 2011, April 2011 was not a good year for a lot of the east coast. Huge rainfall, huge amount of sediment. So my role here, I've been with the council 17 years, and the last 2 have been involved with this role here. I went out to the Waipuka and caught up with 1 or 2 farmers to start off with, and they wanted to fence off and do some riparian strips, planting out of the areas, and I've just progressed my way through. So what we've got here is land use capability. So the land that we've got here, it's not really suitable for applying a tractor over and putting crops in. It's more so your sheep and beef type style of country, LU6, 7s, which means it's quite high mudstone base with a very small amount of soil on the top that's moves fairly easily when the water comes onto it, when good heavy rains. This here is called our sediment yield. So this is being worked out as to how many tonnes per hectare sediment moves. So basically, in some cases in a rain event, you might get a tablespoon type sort of per hectare move. In other cases, you might get a whole truckload move. So it's calculated on the risk factors of how steep that land is. So for this particular incident or case study, we've got 7 properties. We've grouped them. So Farm 1 is the source of the spring, or where the spring water comes from and that flows to the Waipuka. So at the moment there's sort of 1,130 metres of fencing to complete. They've done around about 400 metres of that so far, looking to plant out 5,000 natives in the area. Poplars, willows in the area as well to help stabilise that land. Hopefully you'll see from this slide here, excuse me, this is the source. This is the spring water. So it really hasn't got much of a chance of being clean when it's coming out of the ground, and stock, in particular cattle, have pugged it up and made it pretty grimy and dirty before it even starts to flow. The next photo will show you the overview. So that's looking back at the spring. So to the right of that willow tree area is where the spring is actually coming out of. You can see the steep sided walls there, and that's very shallow earth that's sitting on the mudstone. So it's moving before it even gets a chance. So that's been fenced out so far, 600 metres of fencing that is completed on there. So that Farm 2 is 3 properties. So they total around about 50 hectares in total. 600 metres of fencing has been completed. So there's 2,000 natives being planted and 2,000 more natives to be planted in the area in the coming winter with these 3 properties. Topography, you'll see that it's quite steep. And a lot of the pot marks that you see there, or the slip at sheet erosion, was caused April 2011. It activated a lot of this country. So with it being activated, it's not going to take much more for it to carry on. So a lot of the farmers in the area are being proactive. Stream bank erosion, obviously that's throughout Hawke's Bay. That's a big problem. And taking stock out of that straight away takes away the impaction of the stock. Planting natives, contract teams. Hawke's Bay is short of contractors, decent contractors. Jonathan Dick through TK has got the rangers. They're currently been employed by the Maori Tautra, and they've got some other little jobs that they're getting themselves into to build capacity, show that they're able to do this. This is great. Willow removal, obviously one of the main things that was planted years ago was a lot of willows. Sometimes they were the wrong type of willows. And they were choking waterways. Taking them out and now putting native in there through the riparian helps with that flood zone, helps with that filtration, and that's basically what we want to do is filtrate everything before it gets to that water. Weed control management, obviously for a lot of New Zealand, blackberry, gorse, willow trees, these are all things that need to be managed before we start, but also they need to be managed as we go through. Same with plant management. Putting a plant in the ground is the first step. It's looking after that, nurturing that plant, getting that up and established. Part 3. Now, this is really cool. So we've got 3 properties, Puke Puke Tangiora, Te Whaiti Block and the Adele Mohi Block, all run by Horizons Farming. So over the time that I tried to get all these farms together, Hayden Rees-Jones, Horizons Farming, said, is there any chance that we can try and get these blocks into a program? I suppose in some cases COVID has been nasty, but in other cases COVID's been a good way to get funding coming forward. Through Nick Cavalier, some of you might have met him through the Whangawehi project. Hawke and so forth, Mahia. Some of the board members that were in the Puki Puki Tangiora blocks are also on the same board as Nick. They engaged Nick to ask, is there a possibility that he come on board? Nick and I spoke and we said, hell yeah, how can we do this? So Nick put together a proposal, went to central government, and out of the PGF fund and 1BT fund, we got $1.4 million to leverage against what the council's already doing. And in doing so, the council's also put some money into that program as well. So that's out of this, we've got something like 10 kilometres of new fencing that needs to be established. 7 kilometres of upgraded fencing, so fencing that's existing that needs to be established. Some troughs, some waterways and so forth. Through this waterway, it goes out to Ocean Beach, as I said, to the lagoon, and the council has been sort of honest with knowing that there's a problem there. So fencing the entire gully system out, planting it up, trying to buffer the sediment that goes in there is positive. Inanga spawning sites, it's been found that that's a very large Inanga spawning site down there. So that's some of the stuff that we should be really happy about, is the fact that we're trying to, across the whole board, do a lot of stuff. So with this waterway, there's actually two that join into one, and so you can see, again, the topography, how steep it is, and the makeup of the land area, sheet erosion. Again, you basically just need to spit on it. We call it disparate country, so you just add water and it dissolves. From these slides, you'll see pre-spray, blackberry, and then post. And this is something that really had to be done, because there's no point in trying to restore something or make it better, and we've got an infestation where the birds that we want to encourage in, they know no different about what they're eating and what they're putting out. So trying to control the weed source in particular. External contractors, there's Nick Cavalier, Horizons Farming, and the fencer, New Zealand Fencing Limited, Shay, and he's doing an extremely good job in putting 10 kilometres of fencing in. There's existing native bush now, so that means that it's basically established itself, and there's no point in trying to put something different in there that's going to turn its toes up and die. The species that we're finding there is basically going to be replicated in the 190, 200,000 species that are going to be replanted in this area. Highly erosional prone faces, as you can see from the pot marks.
Just a question before you go any further. So, the self-establishing native plants, how effective are they around establishing themselves without human intervention?
So, in reality, blackberry, gorse, manuka kanuka are basically nurse crop species. So, you've got mohi bush and a few other remnants around the area where the birds might pass through, use it as a drop-off zone, and away they go. So the establishment of native bush does happen. It's a slow process. So potentially planting out 190, 200,000 plants to try and help that establishment. Plus, obviously you're going to get other species, keystone species that might turn up, like from mohi in particular, top bush. The flight range from in the area, this is essentially creating corridors.
Thank you.
Question being, how do you keep them alive?
Basically, the main thing is picking the species that are already there, that have shown that they can live there. That's the main thing. The other thing is also planting them in spots. So there is quite a bit of moisture in a lot of these areas. If you were to go too far up into the steep faces, you're going to lose some. So having them established probably lower down and where there's a bit more moisture is probably the practical key to it. And eventually it will spread up.
There's trees all around Hiratonga dead. The parks.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, obviously, last year was, it was like in the 10th, or, under the 10th decile of how dry it was for the region. In reality, the amount of rain that we've probably not received hasn't really restored us back to a full, aquifer. So, and watching the weather now at the moment, but before March, we'd really want some good serious rain before March. Even some ex-tropical cyclones would be handy, But
Can you
yeah,
organise that?
Are the trees that struggle in the dry environment more imported trees or native trees?
so there are, South Africa, there are some trees that do well here in New Zealand, like a South African type sort of style of trees, which are based on the bottle brushes and bits and pieces like that. But generally, there are dry trees that you'd recommend for areas like Matsudana, Tangoyo, as opposed to Kawa, which Kawa likes a wet foot. Yeah.
Dean, another question. So all these areas which are, these faces, they're going to be all fenced off so stock can't get in?
For this particular project, the gully system, the eroding gully system, is going to be fenced off, yeah. For some of the other areas, the management of the gully system where this flows through, but also through their lower slopes, poles in particular, willow or poplar poles being prescribed. And then also, for some of those lifestyle blocks, they've decided that they're going to cut out 3 hectares of, say, 9 hectares that they might have, so limit their grazing. So in some cases, a light graze once a year or twice a year is not a bad thing. And it also controls any fire risks too, and taking that fuel out. About there. I think we're just about there. And this is the wider project team, Nima Bartlett, Mark Tawhaiti, Kuru Tawhaiti, Adele Mohi in particular, Just while that's there, there's another project that myself and Nick Cavalier are looking at trying to establish, is the Wanungura, which flows from Te Aratipi. It's another spring-fed system down past the Waimarama Marae and out to the coast. We had engagement from all the community there, landowners and that. It was fantastic to have them on board and try and put a funding bid in. So hopefully we might be able to get through the first round. It's just the people who have, those are the people who have contributed.
So it's just to add, I think in 2018, the council supported a project, one of our ahu whenua trusts up in the Ripia, and we planted 20,000, but now the trust has continued that project on, they're going to plant 100,000. So I'm just saying with the support in that, it does feel benefit for landowners, and just, it's like anything, you start something and then it grows, so just acknowledge that support for the trust that the council provided back then at the early stages.
Just another further question, Madam Chair. How has the uptake from Maori landowners been in regards to?
So for this particular project and also the Wanungura project that I'm dealing with, very good. Obviously, the first thing they say is, we've got heaps of land, but we're short on money. And at the moment, there is a lot of funding streams that are open. Having someone like Nick Cavalier, or there are staff members here, Hedy McLennan in particular, they're looking for how we can extract money to help offset what we've got. We've got enthusiasm, as it's been described earlier on. I mean, we just need more money. We're one of those councils that, if we were Auckland, Christchurch, Wellington, probably had a bit more of an overhead. So it's trying to be smart about how we make our bang for our buck move further. But working in, fantastic. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm just mindful it's like Claire's out. So no, thank you for your presentation, and it was really interesting. I do recall Palmer Gowan. We had a hui with the Ratura Place going, and we talked about it's quite expensive to plant the native out. And we talked about seed islands, so the natives, just a cluster of natives, like how you've already got them there.
Yes,
And so the birds doing the work, but maybe a little bit of assistance with the canopy.
correct.
Yeah, no, kia ora, thank you very much. That's
Thank you,
really
good.
impressive. And yeah, I think we'll need to, we're a little bit late, 10 minutes late, but we can have lunch and we can like, find the kai. Much more.
Me whakapahi ki tō mātou kai. Māngai ngāne he rapun te takatari tap. Pai me nei kai he ora mo tō mātou tinana. Pāngai ki tō mātou wailu ki te taro o te ora. Koe ana hoki te māngai he te tuku mai, ai nei a ka nea.
And yeah, when I start back on time 12:30, so I'm just shortened your lunch to 20 minutes.
Oh, yeah.